Welcome to our weekly Church on the Rock podcast. For more information, visit us at churchak.org, download our Church on the Rock AK app, or like us on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our weekly podcast.
Such ominous music. Marriage. My goodness. A couple things as we get rolling here. You heard Pastor Paul mention the Peru trip. My oldest daughter, Adeline, and I got to be on that trip. Absolutely phenomenal trip. I mean, I would say, and I made a post about this last week, but if you have the opportunity, it's worth every penny spent at the right time to take your kids on a missions trip to a developing nation. We did that with our son Caleb, with our girls who've been talking about it for the past several years, like where would you like to go on your first trip? And this is the one Adeline ended up on, and I could have not asked for a better group of people to be on this trip with. And I'll just say this, I've been on a few missions trips and quite a few with students, and this was the best group of students I have ever been on a trip with. And here's what I mean by that. Not one complaint that I heard the entire time. I can't get parents to not complain on, like adults, grown-ups, and yet they were there, they were ready to work, they worked hard, got a lot done, and just were full of joy the whole time. It was an absolutely great trip. Paul and Kim, nice work. For me as a leader to be able to be on a trip where I'm not thinking, why are they doing that? Why didn't someone take care of this? Like, why haven't we eaten in 3 days? Like, they just had all the bases covered, and I got to just enjoy being there with my daughter, and also getting to know a lot of our students, many of whom I've known since they were little kids, some since they were like 3 years old, but don't have real relationship with them. And on this trip, I got to be with them in a way that built some relationship. And here's what was so cool. As I was looking over that group of students, I was thinking, there are pastors in this group. There are missionaries in this group. There are even, I know this is going to be a shocker, there are even politicians in this group. Like, God would love to redeem that space. That in this group are the next generation of leaders. And it was so obvious to me, which also means, and you probably already know this, that we bear a certain responsibility to that generation to model some things for them that maybe we didn't have modeled for ourselves, depending on your situation, but either way, to model some things for them so that they could be better in the future than we've been in the past. And in one of those areas is the area of marriage. I know what you're thinking, Princess Bride. But I made a vow that I was not going to say it. So just say it in your own head. And here's the thing. We're going to spend the next few moments, actually the next 2 weeks, but today specifically, talking not just about marriage, but about some principles in marriage in relationship to our tongue. The words that come out of our mouths. What we say to one another and what we say about one another. And we're going to be digging into that over the next 2 weeks. But here's what I want to tell you. These principles actually apply whether you're married or not. They could actually be applied in almost any relationship. That being said, while this would be beneficial for anyone who's listening to apply in their relationships, it's also specifically about a unique relationship that God designed, and that is the marriage relationship. And here's why I say that, because culturally, we live in a time where we believe that God's highest priority for us is our personal happiness. And so we're okay living outside of God's explicit commands about how we should be living our lives, because we fundamentally believe that God gets us. He understands me. He knows that this is what makes me happy, or he knows what my past wounds are. And so I should be able to live outside of obedience to God and yet experience the blessing of God in my relationship. And I want to tell you that is not true. Now, here's what is true. God pours out his blessing on the righteous and the unrighteous. Like, the general blessing of God actually shows up in our lives in all kinds of ways. But I want to be really specific about how I'm saying this. If you're not willing to obey God's commands, you should not expect to experience God's blessings. And when we do bring our lives into alignment with God's commands, then we can expect to experience the fruit of being in alignment with those things. But if you believe God's highest priority is your personal happiness, that you would have whatever you desire, you have misunderstood God. His highest desire is for your good, and your good may not mean that you get what you want right now. It's true in parenting, isn't it? At least it should be true in parenting. And so I want to just make this caveat in the beginning that if you are unwilling to step into obedience in God's areas of command, then you shouldn't expect to experience God's blessings in all the other areas. Man, preacher, I thought you were going to be funny today. Don't worry, we'll get there. But I think it's an important reminder. My title today is Watch Your Mouth. I want to start with live long and prosper. Any Star Trek fans in the house? My daughter's a Star Trek fan, and I don't know if she's ever seen an episode of it. I don't even know why. She just thinks it's intriguing. But you remember Spock. Little did we know Spock had it right all along, right? He's like, he comes up to greet you, live long and prosper, which I always thought was weird, because if you ever saw Mork and Mindy, this transitions easily into nanu nanu. I'm old, whatever. But Spock would come up, and this would be his greeting. And this is what was so interesting about Spock, is Spock was a really unique individual, right? He didn't have any emotion that you could really tell. He was just going to give you the facts. He was almost always going to be right about the facts, and then he would never lie. So you just got this real, like, practical, matter-of-fact engagement. Spock's weakness is he had no empathy. He couldn't understand human emotion, but he could be really pragmatic and practical, and at least when you got into a fight with him, it wasn't going to be an overly emotional fight, and he wasn't going to be deeply offended by something that you said. Little did we know that Spock had some things nailed down. Here's the problem. He says, live long and prosper, with his little pointy ears, live long and prosper, but he didn't tell you how. Isn't that frustrating? Like, succeed in marriage. Bye. Like, I'd love to know how to live long and prosper. Would anyone else like to know how to do that? Like, how do I live long and prosper? And by the way, I saw Paul raise his hand back there, because he's one of 3 people who wants to know how to live long and prosper in the room. And he just mentioned to me before service, he's like, man, this message is going to be so good for Emily. I know, youth pastors. Now, let me say, anyone like to know how to live long and prosper? You can raise your hand. It's like this. You just like, come on, live long and prosper. Anybody in the room? Okay, yeah. Okay, then we will continue. Psalm 34, verse 12, this is gonna blow your mind. Does anyone want to live a life that is long and prosperous? That's how it starts. Yes, I do. Well, here's how. Then keep your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from telling lies. Now, I think we sort of intuitively get the keep your lips from telling lies piece. Like, I think we generally know what a lie is. My girls haven't fully figured it out yet. I've been trying to explain it for quite some time. But I think generally, but what does it mean to not speak evil? Because that's really broad and somewhat general. Like, what is speaking evil? Our words matter more than we could imagine. And I would say there are few places that they matter more than in the marriage relationship. The way we speak to one another and the way we speak about one another is significant. In fact, in Proverbs 18, this is what the author has to say in verse 20. From the fruit of a man's mouth, his stomach is satisfied. He is satisfied by the yield of his lips. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. That first part, to put it in really practical terms, right, that a man is fed or he prospers by the words of his lips, that if you can't be employed, then good luck feeding yourself or your family for that matter. And how you speak to your employer, how you communicate to others, actually will determine whether or not you succeed in so many areas of life. But the second piece, death and life are in the power of the tongue. And the person who understands that will harvest its fruit. You maybe have an experience in life where someone spoke words to you that were death. In fact, you might be able to remember them to this day, word for word. That moment when they just let their tongue loose and you heard something said to you that has shaped how you view yourself, how you view the world, how you view other people, but it brought death to you. And even if they came back and they repented of that, they were sorry for that, somehow it gets burned into our memories. It's also true with blessing. I can remember specific moments in my life. My dad, if any of you know him, he's right over here, and he doesn't talk a lot. I mean, he's really, really quiet. In fact, I grew up with my dad saying this little axiom: Jonathan, you could remain silent and be thought a fool, or you can open your mouth and remove all doubt. And so I chose to be a public speaker as a life career. But it was sort of and when my dad talks, it's like E.F. Hutton, you want to listen. Like, he's been thinking about this. He's got something to really, really say. But I can remember specific moments, even when my dad was speaking to someone else about me, that blessed me to this day. Like, word for word. He was on the phone. We were putting up some goat fencing. I would just encourage you, never buy goats. It's a free tip for today. It's not in the Bible. But anyways, putting up goat fencing, and my dad talking to someone and saying, working with Jonathan makes every job so much easier and so much more fun. He's a lot of fun to work with, and he's a hard worker. And this was like when I was a teenager all the way until now, which isn't that long of a time, but it's a while. Like, blessing also sticks with you. It's powerful. The words of our mouths matter. Which brings me to so many piles, so little time. This is that time of year that we get really excited. The snow starts to melt off, right? And we're like, spring is actually coming. By July, it's going to be here. Like, spring is on the way. But it's also that time of year that everything that was under the snow starts to be revealed. How many of you have dogs? We have 3 dogs. 2 of them are large. And it's a real joy to just be able to open the back door and let them go. And I've worked really, really hard to teach my dogs to go over to the corner of the yard where we have some trees and they can do their business right there. But when the snow flies, the closer to the porch they are, the happier they are. Like, it takes everything to get them to go. They will go on the porch if I let them go on the porch. And in fact, we got this little short, long-haired dachshund, and when we had our first snowfall, we let Jack out of the house to go to the bathroom. He's like, boom, he launches off the porch, and it's like, whoosh, he disappears. And after that, he was like, nope, not going out there again. Like, that seemed stupid. And so, but getting my dogs, so finally you have to do, right, or at least I had to, I did a maze in my yard, and all they do is go in the maze, right? So now when I look from my upstairs window down at my yard, I'm like, Lord, just send one more snowfall. I don't want to see all of that, but it's coming, right? As the snow melts, we sent our girls out. This was 2 days ago. Sent our girls out. We do this little deal, like go pick up 5 piles of poo, and then we'll watch a show or something. So they send, first one goes out, 5, 15. Is there still more? Oh yeah, there's lots more. Okay, let's do it again. 30. Let's do it one more time. 45 piles, and they haven't even scratched the surface. When the snow melts, it is going to stank in my yard. It's also going to stink in all of Alaska. I'm telling you, I am so confident of this. You know when we have breakup, that mud oozes up from the ground? It's not mud. It's the cumulative dog poo from around our state that is actually coming up in your parking lot and driveway. That's what is happening. I know it. That's why it smells so bad. Anyways, it's coming because the reality is that things that are buried under the surface will be revealed in time. What's going on in here will show up and come out of our mouths. In fact, Jesus addresses this issue with the Pharisees. Often I think, man, it would be so cool to be able to communicate like Jesus on a Sunday. Like you just open up a sermon with, "You brood of vipers. You are like whitewashed tombs, right? Dead man's bones on the inside." But Jesus is a little upset with the Pharisees for a specific reason. They talk a good talk, but they aren't actually good people. They're hypocritical. And so here's what he says in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34 through 37. "You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good person out of his good treasures brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasures brings forth evil. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will," listen to this, "give account for every careless word and Facebook post that they speak." It's not in there, but it's true. "For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." Is anyone else terrified right now? Like, I'm thinking about Jonas. That guy says a lot. No, I'm just kidding. I know, it was terrible. How about Pastor Jonas last week bringing the word? That was good stuff. I actually watched live from Peru. But here's the reality. For many of us, that everything that pops into our head comes out of our mouths, right? We will be judged. He doesn't say eternally condemned, but we will be judged by every careless word that comes out of our mouths. That should cause us to pause for a moment and ponder that. In fact, I would even say that every word that gets muttered under our breath, right? I hate working on cars. Like, I hate it so much that I would spend my children's inheritance to not have to work on my car. Like, I'm no good at it. I love working with my hands. I love building stuff, but mechanical stuff, in the winter, there are words that really want to come out of my heart when that wrench slips off and your knuckles rake against that radiator, like, and I'm thinking, like, what's in my heart that wants to come out right now? Because it's worth evaluating why we say the things that we say. Which brings me to rudders, racehorses, and ragers. Little things that have a big impact. In fact, in James chapter 3, the writer is going to describe a really small member of our body, a really small muscle in our body, and the power that that muscle has, and he's going to use three different things to illustrate it. James chapter 3, verses 3 through 10. "We can make a large horse go wherever we want by means of a small bit in its mouth. And a small rudder makes a huge ship turn wherever the pilot chooses to go, even though the winds are strong. In the same way, the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire." Like, the tongue can say wonderful and beautiful and grand things, and the tongue can also create a rager of a forest fire in an instant. That little spark could destroy thousands of acres. And it's true in our lives. And he says, it's astounding that we could control a horse with a little bit, and we could control a ship with a little rudder, and yet with our tongue we can also set an entire forest on fire by the way that we speak to one another. Verse 7, he goes on to say, people can tame all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and fish, but no one can tame the tongue. It is restless and full of evil, a deadly poison. Sometimes it praises our Lord and Father, and sometimes it curses those who have been made in the image of God. And so blessing and cursing come pouring out of the same mouth. Surely, my brothers and sisters, this is not right. I find it so interesting that he doesn't say, with our mouths we praise and worship God, and with the same mouth we curse God. Because then I can sort of excuse it. Well, actually, I don't curse God. I would never curse God. But instead, he shifts gears from blessing God to cursing people who are made in his image. And all of a sudden, you're like, oh, I may have done that today. He's putting it into a very real context. This should not be so, that we would curse one another and bless God with our same mouth. Now, anybody in here gotten all of that perfect so far in your life? You're like, I don't even know why you're preaching on this. Super easy for me. Because if so, we'll switch places right now. Because here's what I want you to know. This topic, this issue, is something everyone in this room struggles with. Everyone. This is why I say that. When you say this word, better. Okay, but say it like you're awake. Better. That's the goal. The goal is to be moving in a direction to get better at speaking life instead of curse over one another. And we're all in that process. And if you've stalled out somewhere, or you haven't even given it thought, or you're pretending there are no issues, I would say today is an opportunity to get better at living in this kind of way in your marriage relationship. My father-in-law told me a story years ago. It's stuck with me ever since. It's probably been 20 years ago or more now. He used to have a real anger issue. And it wasn't like the anger where you're throwing stuff through a window, but it was like this low-grade rage. Everyone knew he was mad, right? And he would stomp around the house and storm around the house and brood and be non-responsive. But he was glad that everybody knew that he was mad. And you never knew what it was that was going to set him off. And his wife was speaking to him about this at one point, and his response to her was, listen, it doesn't happen all the time. It's only sometimes that I lose my temper. And she said to him, how would you like to live at the base of a volcano that only erupts sometimes? You never know when it's going to be. Is it better that it only erupts sometimes rather than all the time? In some ways, it just creates more uncertainty. And as soon as he said it, I was like, yep. I get that. I've somehow excused certain behaviors in my life because they only happen sometimes. But that isn't an excuse. How would you like to live at the base of a volcano that only erupts sometimes? Anybody else feel convicted yet? I have to say this 3 times. Like, if you think it's hard for you, I have to hear myself say it 3 times. Be like, Lord, work in me. Work with me. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 16, a fool is quick-tempered, but a wise person stays calm even when insulted. That's a tough one, isn't it? I'm going to confess something right now. Do not tell my girls that I confess this to you. I know you will anyways, but whatever. So we have 2 wrestling teams in our house. I've described them to you before. We have the Wolf Pack, which is all 3 of my girls, and the Grizzly Bears, which is just me. It should just be the Grizzly Bear. And so it's me against them. This has been going on for years, but we haven't wrestled in a while. And last night they were begging and begging and begging. And so I'm like, actually the night before, and I said, I need another day of rest before we do it. And so we got mattresses. We put them down on the floor in the living room. We got pillows and blankets and all kinds of stuff because they're at that size now that we could do some damage to each other. And they come off the couches like, tag me in. And And so it's all three of them against me. They're howling. They're the wolf pack. And here's what happened last night. We set a 5-minute timer. Kitri's just sitting on the couch giggling and taking pictures. We set a 5-minute timer, and they go after it. And for the first time ever, I haven't confessed this to them yet. I've been pretending I'll let them win, but they won. The goal was either get me on my back or on my belly, and you win. And they did it. Whatever. Twice. So my only recourse at that point is just to insult them. So I'm like, ooh, cute little wolf cubs. Where's your den mother? Isn't it your bedtime? And so, of course, they respond in kind to my insults to their, wrestling team. It went all the way to this morning as we were driving here this morning. They were continuing to, how's the little bear doing? I'm like, it's hard when someone insults you not to respond in kind, right? But a fool is quick-tempered, but a wise person stays calm even when insulted. Or Proverbs 15, verse 1, a gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. You know that's true, right? Like if I could just respond, no matter how harsh or accusatory this was, if I could respond with a gentle answer, I could reset the tone for a conversation that we're having right now. In James chapter 1, verse 19, this is what he says. Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. There is an anger that produces the results God desires, but it's not the anger of your flesh. It's not personal offense, right? It's not human. Verse 26, if you claim to be religious but don't control your tongue, you are fooling yourself and your religion is worthless. Listen, take it up with Jesus. We're going to move on. Called up or called out. The art of calling your spouse up rather than just calling them out. I don't know about you, but nobody likes to be called out, right? Especially in front of other people. Since I'm confessing today, which apparently I do every week, I have terrible form when it comes to deadlifts. Now, Tim is here. He knows how it's supposed to look. He's a bodybuilder. I've got CrossFit friends in here. But when it comes to deadlifts, if it's lightweight, I can do fine. But once it gets really heavy, I get this arch in my back, and then they're like, hey, that's inappropriate. You're going to hurt yourself. I'm like, I've never hurt myself before. I can lift a lot of weight if I can just arch my back some. I think my back is flat. It feels flat, right? And so I hit my max, right? My personal record, my PR for deadlift. It was 10,000 pounds, and I had a slight curvature to my back, right? Now, I've got friends who are like, yeah, way to go, Walker, woo! And then I've got friends who are like, nope, your back was arched. In front of everyone. Like, can you not just celebrate with me? Nobody likes being called out in front of everybody, right? My wife is actually really uniquely gifted in this area. She has the ability to see the potential in me. She's not calling out things that don't exist at all. They may not exist at the level that I would like them to, nor she would like them to, but she can see it, and she calls me up to that thing. She says, man, you're a great dad. You just play with our girls. I'm like, I don't play with them enough, but you do, and they love it when you do. And here's what happens as a man in particular, when she is calling me up like that, everything in me is like, I want to be that. I can see it. I know I can do better in this area versus always calling out the things that I do wrong. That's my tendency. My tendency is to see all the things that need to be fixed and repaired and mended, and I spend all of my time calling other people out for not getting it right, and it produces very little fruit in the long haul. And I would just say, in your marriage relationship, if you would learn to master the art of calling the other person up instead of just calling their bad behavior out, you would actually watch them rise to the occasion. It is a powerful thing. Now, when it comes to fights, which, by the way, fights aren't inherently wrong in a marriage relationship. In fact, they're really important in a marriage relationship, but we'll get to that in just a moment. If you want to start a fight off wrong, start with an accusation. See, here's what we do. We leave the house in the morning. We think about some offensive thing that was said or something that happened. We think on it all day long. We've concluded we know exactly what their motivations were. We know exactly what they meant, and we know exactly what we want to say when we get home. Right? And then we get home and we're loaded for bear, but what we may encounter might actually just be a weasel, right? Like a shrew, but we're loaded for bear. And if you could come into a conversation asking authentic questions rather than making accusations, you would get so much further. And here's why I say genuine or authentic, sincere questions. Because you can ask questions that are rhetorical, right? You can ask questions in a way that makes it really clear that you're actually making an accusation. We were down in Peru. I was going to take a shower. I'm in the guys' dorm area. And the guys, as shocking as this may sound to you as parents, left their underwear hanging in the shower, which is exactly what I want while I'm taking a shower, someone's underwear at my head level, right? So I go back out looking like a crazed lunatic. They're playing soccer out there, and I'm like, which one of you 10-watt light bulbs left your underwear in the shower again? I'm not really asking a question, I'm making an accusation, right? There's a way to ask questions that is sincere and authentic. Ask questions, don't make accusations. If you want an unproductive fight, then start with an accusation. If you want a constructive conversation, start with sincere questions. Now, Scripture describes in the marriage relationship an authority structure. I know we don't like this much, but in Ephesians chapter 5 is one of many places where the Scriptures describe an authority structure in the marriage relationship. And I would actually say it's more specifically describing a structure of relating to one another in order to bless. Here's what I mean by that. If you look at Ephesians chapter 5, which has sort of fallen out of popularity in modern days because it's got this word submit in it. But it starts actually with husbands, love your wives however you see fit. No, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Buckle up, men, because he came not to be served, but to serve. He came to lay his life down as a ransom for many. He came to protect and defend and cherish, right? So when you think about the role of the man, right, it's actually a role of serving and protecting and nurturing and caring for, which then would make the other part a whole lot easier, wouldn't it? And so when you look at this relationship, it's clearly laid out in the Scriptures as a relationship that has a structure to it, has an authority structure to it. But you're also in a other relationship in your marriage relationship. And this one's a little bit more South Carolina, because you're also brother and sister. Some of you will get that on the way home. West Virginia? It's not Tennessee, I'll tell you that much. Okay, Willow. No, I'm just, okay. Sorry. Here's the interesting thing, that while we are husband and wife, Kitri and I, she is also my sister in Christ, which means she bears responsibility and authority to confront me when I'm in sin. Now, she has to ask the Lord about how to do that, like what's the most beneficial or appropriate or healthy way for us to address this. But she actually has authority and responsibility to address me in those areas of sin in my life. And I actually expect her to do that. It's a really unique relationship, but if you grew up in a culture where you believe that you are supposed to keep your mouth shut and you never say anything, that is not a biblical approach to the marriage relationship, nor the relationship as joint heirs in Jesus. I could spend a whole lot more time there, but we don't have time to spend a whole lot more time there. Proverbs 25:11 and 12 says this: timely advice is lovely, like golden apples in a silver basket. To one who listens, valid criticism is like gold. How many of you love criticism? Like, man, if I could wake up every morning with some criticism nobody really likes criticism. Our response typically to criticism is defensiveness. It's my response to criticism. But if it's coming from someone that I love and I know loves me, he says criticism, valid criticism, should be viewed as gold given to you, that you should receive it no matter who it's coming from if it's valid. That's really important. Which brings me to the last piece here, the rules of engagement or the art of having fruitful fights. I would say the generation before me and the generations before that sort of had a fundamental assumption about fighting in a marriage relationship. And it was this, not that you should never fight, but it was that never let your children see you fight. And so parents would have disagreements, but they would do it behind closed doors. And I actually believe that's really unhealthy. In fact, I believe it's unhealthy for a really specific reason. And the reason is this, right? Not that we should always fight in front of our children or that we should fight however we want, but if we could learn to fight in a way that is fruitful and biblical, they could observe it and learn how to do it as well. And I actually think there's a way to do that. I think we can rob a generation of the ability to see how to resolve conflicts by never having conflicts in front of them. So some of you maybe never saw your parents fight, and so you were never equipped with the tools, or you saw them fight in a really unhealthy way that was really destructive and demeaning, and you have to learn how to do away with that model and embrace something that God describes. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 and 9, he says this, "Finally, all of you should be of one mind. Sympathize with each other, love each other as brothers and sisters, be tender-hearted, and keep a humble attitude. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't retaliate with insults when people insult you." I want to give you 3 healthy habits, and then in a few moments I'm going to give you 4 fight rules. 3 healthy habits in a marriage relationship. Here's the 3 key words: emotions, empathy, and express. Let me explain what I mean by these. Emotions. Learn how to identify your own emotion. Often you come into a disagreement or an argument or a fight and you come in believing that what you're actually feeling is anger. But if you could pause for a moment, we've talked about this before, if you could pause for a moment and say, what am I actually feeling? Anger is a power emotion, but what I may actually be feeling is I may be feeling disrespected. I may be feeling insecure. I may be feeling afraid. Right? It could be any number of things, but if I could identify that, and I'm going to push it a step further, this is going to be terrifying to you men. If I could push it a step further, once you identify that emotion, say it out loud to your spouse. You want to watch a conversation get softened in a heartbeat? Those moments when I've said to Kitri, I know I'm acting angry, but what I'm actually feeling is scared. Man, all of a sudden, we're having an entirely different conversation now. And it takes some work because you believe you're just angry. But if you paused and said, why do I think I'm angry? You could get to a core emotion and describe that emotion, and it will change that conversation. It's a habit to develop. And then empathy. Show your spouse empathy. Ask enough questions. Don't assume you have all the answers. Don't think you know the why, right? In other words, ask enough questions to understand why they feel the way they do. You may still totally disagree, but you can at least empathize with them. Nope, I get it. I get why you feel this way about this issue. Empathy. And the last one, express. Express affection for one another. This is so powerful. Express affection for one another. Have you ever tried to fight while snuggling? Like we were just in Peru, we got to hold sloths. You should see my daughter's face while she's holding this sloth. It's like all wrapped around her. It's flea-ridden, but still, it's like super cute. Like all wrapped around her. Did you know a group of sloths is called a snuggle? Who knew? I do now. But have you ever tried to fight while snuggling? Now, I'm not saying you have to do that in the midst of the conversation, but when that conversation is over, express your affection for one another. Because often you walk away from a disagreement believing they think that's all I am, or that's the only thing they feel about me, or this has shifted everything, and you need to say that it hasn't. You need to express your affection for one another, hug one another, but show that affection, and you will soften that disagreement. And he wraps it up, 1 Peter 3, 9 and 11. Instead, pay them back with a blessing. Don't insult people who insult you. Pay them back with a blessing. This is what God has called you to do, and he will bless you for it. For Scripture says, if you want to enjoy life and see happy days, keep your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from telling lies. I'm going to give you our 4 fight rules. These are our 4 fight rules, and by our, I don't mean Church on the Rocks. I mean Kitchery and mine. We made these rules before we ever actually got married. We said, what would we want our disagreements to look like, and what are our rules of engagement? So 4 fight rules, these have worked for us. They have produced results in our life over the years. We've had to contend to maintain them, and we made them in a moment of rational thinking. Do not create rules in the middle of a fight. Like, all right, I got a rule. You can't look at me like that. Oh, yeah, well, I have a rule. You can't be ugly when we fight. Like, I mean, it just doesn't work. Anyways, we made these in a moment of rational thinking. What do we think would be healthy to avoid, and what we think would be healthy to do? Here they are. The first one is this: never swear. Here's what I mean by that. We will not use foul, demeaning, or abusive language toward one another when we are in a disagreement. I know. But here's the thing. Foul language in a disagreement is expressed from a place of anger. It reveals something about what's going on in our hearts, and my inability to control my tongue while we're talking actually says something to the other person about how furious I am, how wrong they are. But it actually is intended to silence the other person. And the more harsh and foul I get with my language, the more I can silence them from responding. So we just said we're not going to do it. We're not going to swear. We won't use foul, demeaning, or abusive language when we fight. The second one is this: never threaten. Here's what we mean. We will not threaten divorce, abandonment, or retaliation. You have effectively ended any productive conversation the moment that you do that. The D word will never come up in our disagreements. That is not the place for it. In fact, we made a covenant to one another, and what I'm saying when I threaten these things is I'm saying my covenant is no longer valid because I'm so angry about this issue. And we will throw that stuff out there at some of the most ridiculous moments, and we will look back and say, I don't know why I ever threatened that, but you did, and it's left your mouth into their ears, and it is there. We will never threaten in our fights. And then we will permit pauses. Listen, this is going to come as a shock to you, but Kitchery is wired differently than me. I've discovered most people are wired differently than me, but Kitchery needs time to think about something. And if it's a really serious topic that we're discussing, then she may need a little bit more time. I want to resolve it right now because Jesus wants it resolved right now. But she needs some time. And she has permission, and I have permission to say, I need to put this on pause because I need to figure out what I'm actually feeling and what I actually think about that so that we could come to a conclusion. And I want to just plow forward in part because I believe I could win this fight right now because she doesn't know what she's thinking, which is selfishness. It's bullying in that conversation. And so we permit pauses with this caveat: we will come back and finish this conversation, right? It's not like, hey, I need to pause. How long? 3 years? Right? Because I need this snow machine tomorrow. Oh, too close to home? Okay. Permit pauses. And the last one, repent quickly. Listen, what we're talking about is getting better at this, and you will get it wrong. There will be moments that I step outside the bounds of our rules of engagement. There will be moments that I say something stupid. And in those moments, humility demands of you. Love demands of you that you repent quickly and easily. And I found that the faster I do that, the faster we can resolve things, and the faster I can be back in right relationship with my Father in heaven. And there are moments that I know as soon as I say it, you probably know as soon as you say it, that was stupid, even if they don't tell you. Like I should not have said, repent right now. Own it. That's what we've committed to each other, that when we get it wrong, we will own it. Sometimes it's not till I get upstairs and I'm going into our bedroom. I only say this because it may have happened recently. And I'm in our bedroom and I'm like, oh, yeah, that was not loving. Like, that was harsh, or that was selfish. I don't want to go make it right. I'm still mad. But I'm going to go make it right because we committed to this. And so I walk back down the stairs. I say, Kitri, the way I said that, or that accusation I made, or whatever it was, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? I'm still right about what we're arguing about, but I'm also, no, you don't say the other part. You just own it. You just own it. Because what that really displays is the heart of Jesus. I'm not pretending that I always get it right, and when I don't, it's important that you hear me say, I got it wrong. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And I put that power back in your hands to love me, even in the midst of my own failures and brokenness. I want to invite you to stand. I was thinking about this song we were singing earlier, Hope Has a Name. I want to go back into it just for a moment, and then we're going to wrap up. But here's the deal. This stuff is hard, right? Anybody think it's easy? This stuff is hard. And you weren't called to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, just buckle down and get it right. You're actually called to depend on the Spirit of the living God to be able to live with one another in a way that He has designed us to. And if you're trying to do it on your own, good luck. Jesus wants you to know there is hope. I can tell you, I've seen marriages, I've seen some of them in this room, that you would have looked at them 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and you would have said, no way, it's over, they're done, it can't be repaired, there's too much water under that bridge already fell in the water, and I'm just telling you, I have watched God over and over and over again do the absolutely miraculous in relationships through the power of the Holy Spirit. So as we go into this song, I'm going to invite our prayer ministry teams to be available, and then when the song's over, we're going to come back and we're going to close out together. Jesus, we just want to say, we need you. You did model it perfectly. The only human to ever do so. And then you made your Spirit available to dwell in us so that we could thrive in the institution you designed, marriage relationship. Would you teach us to do that, and would you fill us with hope today?
Thank you for listening. For more of our podcasts and to discover how you can connect, visit us at churchak.org or download our Church on the Rock AK app from either iTunes or Google Play.